According to the Oxford English Dictionary, there are over 170,000 words in the English language, and every single one of these words has its own unique history of how that exact cluster of syllables ended up being associated with its own unique meaning. In some cases, we just use existing words to create new ones, like the name of this beautiful creature that just happens to enjoy eating a certain kind of insects. Which makes me kind of sad that we collectively decided to forever characterize anteaters just by their diet. Perhaps there's much more to them than that, but for the most of us they will always just be that animal who feasts on ants and nothing more. Anyways, other words have much more complex and far-reaching backgrounds, and tracing back how their today's meaning has developed and changed throughout the centuries can be really fun, well, as far as linguistic facts can be fun at least. To explore one of such stories, we have to go all the way back to the 9th century, when in the far eastern Europe some Viking folks who went by the name Varangians decided to establish a settlement called Ladoga. And for what purpose, you might ask? Well, it was human trafficking. The Volga River provided a good connection to the wealthy Byzantine Empire, which allowed the Vikings to profit from trade of beaver hides, the pelts of the black fox, swords, and, well, slaves. And it just happened that the region was full of healthy and strong Slavic people, while the Byzantine Empire had apparently a shortage of slaves, so the Vikings were fast to, let's say, fill the gap in the market. The Eastern Romans quickly discovered that Slavs were like a premium brand when it came to servants. Here's a passage from the Cambridge Great Medieval History. The Slav was the most prized of human goods, with increased strength outside his marshy land of origin, hardened to the utmost against all privation, industrious, content with little, good-humoured and cheerful, he filled the slave markets of Europe, Asia and Africa. It must be remembered that for every Slavonic slave who reached his destination, at least 10 succumbed to inhuman treatment during transport and to the heat of the climate. So it didn't take long for the trade routes of Slavonic slaves to expand, as everyone seemingly wanted a piece of that pie, including Slavs themselves. Soon Prague became a major European slave trade center, which meant that the Slavs were being transported through mainland Europe to the wide world. And because for the local Latin-speaking population, the only context in which they ever known Slavic people were the slaves transported through Europe, they associated the name of these people with exactly that, slavery. So the Latin word sclavus, after some time, changed its meaning from the name of the tribes living in the east of Europe to simply a slave. That word was then adapted to the Old French and became esclave, and then the Middle English borrowed it from French, as many other words, where it first became sclave, and then through a process of a phonological change lost the k, and that's how we ended up with the word slave. Nowadays, pretty much all European languages use a derivative of this word, and in some of them, the words for slaves and Slavic people are still the same. I'm looking at you, Dutch. Even though the similarity of the words is obvious in most languages, very few people ever seem to pay any mind to it. So this painful and tragic part of Slavic history seems to get forgotten or at least neglected. Of course, the Slavic languages use different words for slaves, as it would be really weird to associate your own people with the idea of slavery. Most of them opted out to use a variation of rob, which came from Proto-Slavic orb, which in turn came from the Proto-Indo-European word for orphan, which also makes you wonder how that came to be. The Slavic word rob seems oddly reminiscent of another English word, the word robot, but they couldn't possibly be connected, you might think. And here I get to surprise you with the magic of etymology once again. In 1920, a certain Czech gentleman who went by the name of Karel Čapek wrote a play which revolved around a concept of a factory where artificial workers were being produced. As this concept was completely new at the time, Čapek had a historical chance to create a new term to describe this kind of non-human worker. And as you probably can guess, he coined the term robot, based on the Czech word robota, meaning a forced labor, which has the same origin as the word rob in other Slavic languages. The famous sci-fi writer Isaac Asimov commented, "Čapek's play is, in my own opinion, a terribly bad one, but it is immortal for that one word. It contributed the word robot not only to English, but through English to all the languages in which science fiction is now written." And now we know that if we trace back the etymology of the word robot all the way back, we find out that somehow it all started from a word that over 1,000 years ago meant an orphan, which in some weird way is oddly fitting. Another word that has seen its meaning change quite a bit throughout the time and adaptations into the different languages is the word demon. Nowadays, the definition that we can find in an English dictionary is an evil spirit, malignant supernatural being, an incubus, a devil. But as you probably can guess, it wasn't always the case. It wasn't even always associated with something bad. The first written mention of the word we find comes from Greek, but it didn't mean an evil spirit. It actually referred to lesser deities or guiding spirits. Specifically, in Greek mythology, demons were abstractions or personifications of human conditions, such as love, youth, rage, or longing. Most of them didn't have their own stories or mythological backgrounds. They were more like mysterious spirits that influenced the fate and behavior of people. They were also perceived to be sort of a bridge between the realm of the gods and the human world. An Irish classical scholar and writer, E.R. Dodds, described the role of demons in the Greek religion as following. All that is demonic lies between the mortal and the immortal. Its functions are to interpret to men communications from the gods and to convey prayers and offerings from men to the gods. Being thus between men and gods, the demon fills up the gap and so acts as a link joining up the whole. And if there is one specific demon that you might be familiar with, it's the demon of Socrates. The Apology of Socrates, written by Plato, because Socrates never actually wrote anything down himself, tells a story of trial of Socrates where he was accused of basically corrupting the youth by spreading extremist ideas such as think for yourself or don't trust the government. During his defense, Socrates mentions that he cannot act unethically because his demon forbids him unethical behavior. And after he ends up being sentenced to death, he states that as his demon didn't interfere with his conduct during the defense, it must have been the correct thing to do. And he sees that as his demon telling him that death might actually be a good thing. So for Socrates, his demon was basically a voice of conscience that told him whenever an action he might undertake was ethically wrong, and he also viewed it as a personal divine gift, so he attributed some kind of metaphysical quality to it. In the ancient Greece, the meaning of demons seemed to be pretty broad, but as the time went on, they started being progressively more and more associated with the forces that evoke unwanted temptations in humans, like anger, rage, or craving for power. So their image was getting closer to what we are familiar with. Later, when Christianity was spreading across the ancient world, the Christian Greeks used that word in their translation of the Bible to describe God of the heathen, heathen idols, and unclean spirits. And the same word was also used in the vulgar Latin translations of the Bible, and this way it became the word to describe evil spirits in pretty much all European languages. And that brings us to the end of this video. We only looked at 3 examples, all from the English language, but I'm curious, what other words with interesting etymologies do you know, perhaps from other languages? Feel free to let me know about them in the comments, and I want to thank you very much for watching to the end.